But look, this is about sustainable cities. When we started on down this track, we hadn't had here in the UK the Uxbridge by-election. You are living a real dilemma now here in the United Kingdom about sustainable cities because of what's happened with the ultra-low emission zone. And what happened in the Uxbridge by-election, very British political problem. But it's now got to the heart of whether the public will accept sustainable cities. And for those of you who are living on a different planet or not reading the papers, it is about Boris Johnson's old constituency in West London, just inside the M25, where there had to be a by-election because he gave up being in Parliament to make a lot of money. And that was on a day when there were 3 by-elections, 2 of which went dramatically for the opposition to the Labour and the Liberal Democrats. But in Uxbridge, because of the ultra-low emission zone, the Conservative candidate, who no one had any idea about, won by 495 seats. This is about what people are prepared to put up with, whether people want to think about their health or whether they're worried about paying £12.50 a day for driving their car if it's not an approved car or van into the centre of London. This is now getting to the heart of politics about sustainable cities. And we're going to see this in a big way over the next few months in the build-up to the general election. What risks will the Labour Party take? What risks will the Conservative Party take or not? I say that because we can talk theory up here, but actually there is a very practical challenge which not just London, but many other cities in the UK are facing, which is, are people prepared to sacrifice their health for financial reasons? So let's move ahead. First of all, what I'd like to do is welcome you all and let me introduce Lykke. You have a very long title, so I'm going to have to read my bit of paper here, which is, it's so long, it goes over. Why don't you say it yourself?
Yeah, I know it's a very long title. It's much shorter in Danish, but it's the Head of Program for Resilient and Sustainable City Solutions.
Does it sound better in Danish?
Yeah, grønne belysninger.
Exactly. That's what I was looking for here, actually.
Yeah.
Annalisa, what do you do?
So I'm an architect at Arkitekter, the UK head of sustainability, and I also sit on the steering group for Arkitekter Clare, who's an advocacy organisation trying to shift paradigms to regenerative thinking.
David.
So I'm head of environment technical with Skanska, major construction firm, involved in shaping sustainable cities. And I have to help and support projects, maximize opportunities and manage risks when it comes to working in the urban environment.
Let me ask all 3 of you right at the beginning. It's very easy to have a session and talk about sustainable cities. We all want to live in something which is better than where we live. But is it something which is easy to have conference sessions about and far more difficult to work out what the aspiration really is? Lykke.
Very quickly and shortly, yes. It is much more difficult to deliver. It's much easier to sit here having nice talks and talking about how fantastic things are working, but actually delivering is difficult. And I can give the example from my own city. We had the ambition of becoming carbon neutral in 2025. And last year, the politicians had to say, we're not going to make it. We will still be short of 400,000 tons. One of the reasons being that Stockholm got the money from the European Union for a carbon capture plant that we also had applied for. So I mean, but it's just showing that it's okay to have the ambition. It's okay to set the nice fine targets and talk all about it. It's much harder to deliver.
How much of that is because of political pressure?
Well,
or is it budgetary?
It's a mixture of national politics, local politics, but also some of the things that you mentioned in your introduction. The fact that do politicians have the necessary courage to implement unpopular solutions, and what will that mean for their re-election?
And that's what we're facing here in London with Sadiq Khan, who believes, and he published a book a few weeks ago called Breathe, based on the case of an 11-year-old girl who died from poisoning on her way to work, poisoned by traffic fumes. And he feels passionately about this, a point of principle, but it could lose him the election next May. Annalisa, what's your view of whether we're over-egging the idea of talking about sustainable cities? Easy to talk about, far harder to achieve.
I mean, I would say that we have some really good examples that we've done at White Arkitekter, which are really starting to implement things about sustainable cities. And we can talk to those examples, but I think it's really good to celebrate those examples and show what's possible. What I do also think is that when we talk about sustainable cities, we have to think about equitability and justice, because as we make a transition, we have to think much more about how we have a more equitable society out of this and which voices are heard in the process of designing and manufacturing the new city. So I think by being a bit more kind of emotive and connected to the ground about what we're doing and seeing kind of small scale examples and building up, as well as like the high level conversations we're having, that's where we're going to have more successes.
How much though is retrofitting old and aging infrastructure really a massive drag on the ambitions that you have for a sustainable city?
I don't think they're a drag at all. I think it's a real big opportunity. I think, we've spoken before about the need for heat pumps and different energy systems. The number one thing we need to do is kind of reduce our energy demand. And we can make really, really great places by retrofitting kind of existing fabrics. We can retrofit buildings as an individual building, but we can also retrofit whole cities. And, we've done projects where we look at nature-based solutions, looking at what's the existing infrastructure we have, what's the initial kind of connectivity, walkability, and how do you retrofit into those places to get more amenity, and so that people kind of have accessible to them the things they need on a city level, as well as improving the energy efficiency of a building itself.
David, what are the principles you adopt in Skanska? I mean, there's, if you like, can I put it bluntly, there's the PR version, but there's the practical business of how you afford it, how you cost it, and the kind of compromises. Look at the pressure now on sewage. Look at the pressure now on cement. Look at the pressure on so much of what you've taken for granted, not you personally or Skanska, but the building industry. 7% of emissions is concrete. And that, a lot of that comes from the major infrastructure projects in main cities.
I mean, simply, you can't stand still. You have to look forward, and you have to continue to evolve and continue to face off the challenge. You can't always take a win every single time. You have to, I think it was mentioned earlier, move and never give up with the overall direction of travel. I think it's scoping an inner city major construction project has to be one of the hardest things to do, because there are so many competing objectives and ambitions, and a city can never stand still. It has to keep moving, has to keep evolving. The aging infrastructure, it's absolutely critical. It's renewed. We get more out of it. We can change its use. We can develop its use, because without it, the aim of the city, the aim of being sustainable is undermined. So it's tough challenge in many respects.
What kind of trade-offs do you have to make internally on this?
I mean, we have to, of course, balance the price, and budgetary pressure, particularly for a long-term scheme, can come in and out of focus, sort of almost as the wind changes sometimes, and that can be a real challenge to manage, and that takes actually a lot of upfront engagement with the client, with the people you're building this for, about what the costs are and what the costs are involved, because ultimately construction is a very small margin business. There isn't a lot of room for wiggle, and anybody who's in the construction industry, particularly in the UK at the moment, will see a raft of firms hitting the wall for unfavorable conditions. So it's a challenge that has to be balanced.
But I have to press you on this. I mean, TCFD, TNFD, the nature, the carbon. In other words, this is now becoming something which is accountable.
Yes.
And it's accountable in the next year, not in the next 10 years.
Yes.
In other words, there's got to be a massive change to create accountability, third-party auditable work.
Most definitely. And accounting for the materials that are being used is something we've taken on fully. So it's part of our targets. But
including the costs.
Including the costs. We have to find a way of managing it. And this was what was attractive to our senior team after a little while, was that it actually involved engaging with the customers you're building for before you physically give them the costs around the materials and the objectives that you're trying to achieve. There has to be a balance, and there has to be some scale back sometimes, but overall our direction of travel is very good.
Lykke, given your long title, which is shorter in Danish, Head of Program for Resilient and Sustainable City Solutions, They are very fashionable words to use
Mhm.
at a critical time like this. Help us understand how that is achievable in a city structure.
Well, I think it's really important is when you think about cities that it's not just buildings. It's actually it's a complex structure of all kinds of things that are interacting with each other, and has social, it has physical aspects that you need to take into consideration. And thinking about sustainability is also about creating solutions that will work for your citizens, that will make their life work, that will make the city function. It's also about looking for what impacts will future climate have on the city, and not just looking at reducing emissions, but it's actually also like, okay, are we going to flood? I mean, if I was living in some places here in London, I would be a little bit worried. Some places where they're building new housing areas.
We are worried, let me reassure you.
Yeah.
And because we are seeing more extreme weather events, we've had drought, we have had heavy floods in many countries in Europe over the past years. And this is going to be something that we also need to take into consideration. And we need to look at the way we approach developing the city in a totally new way, where we are not just looking at building new areas in the city, but much more on retrofitting. Retrofitting is always more sustainable than building new. So we have to look at using things in different ways in the city. And I think that's a very important part of doing things. We did a calculation in Copenhagen saying, okay, if we actually want to reduce emissions on construction, well, we should either cut the building level by down to 10% of the current level, or we should find new ways of doing it. So we need all kinds of partners interacting in order to find the best solutions for the city. So it's not just one sector, it's all sectors that are present in the city, and they need to work together.
How do you respond to the public? How much is the public changing its view? Public is one word, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
In other words, how much do you have to get their consent? And let me put to you, as you've raised it yourself, it's not just sustainable cities, it's survivable cities.
Yeah. Well, we have in Denmark a tradition of having sort of like citizens congregations that are currently, we have had one on the building of an artificial island that's part of protecting the city from storm surges. And we are going to start one now on which will be looking at consumer-based emissions, having local citizens take part in the democratic discussion of what are we actually going to do about this, because we want to move towards also looking at what people are doing themselves in their everyday life. And we know there's a limit on how much we can do that. So we need to interact with them in order to get that.
Is that quite uncomfortable sometimes?
Oh, yes, horribly uncomfortable. Also because, I mean, you talk about the public and I talk about the citizens, but they're not just, I mean, look over this group of people sitting here, you will find all kinds of political and social aspects represented here. And if you're looking at a city, it's even more. Because at least here, everybody has some sort of climate interest in being here. But a lot of other people think that, I mean, why does the city not want me to have my car? I mean, why are they taking away parking spaces? Because I need my car to make a living. And I hate the bicycles. We have bicycles everywhere in Copenhagen. And I'm one of them that always bicycles everywhere. So there is conflict also in between citizens.
It's the same here in London. Listen to taxi drivers when they're sitting there.
But there are no bicycles here compared to Copenhagen.
There are a lot of bicycles. There are a lot of bicycle lanes.
Yeah, but now come to Copenhagen, my dear. I'll show you bicycle lanes.
We'll have another session about bicycle lanes. Annalisa, what are your reflections? I mean, you're wonderful as architects at talking about the theory based on case studies. What are the big ideas that you would come to the table with, saying, you know, forget about nervousness, we can really do this?
So I think when you really think about what's possible in terms of this utopian ideal of what the city is, like if we really think about what makes us happiest and most functioning, most well, then I think we really look at kind of nature solutions as well. So that's, you know, we talk a lot about nature-based solutions. We talk about the potential for trees to lower the temperature by 10 degrees in the city when you have urban heat island effect. It also gives you this amazing wellness and kind of mental health well-being. It increases biodiversity. It also helps with stormwater kind of flood management. So when we think about what are those kind of small or kind of low technology interventions that we can have, I think they can then extrapolate up and be very useful. And I think also to then link that to health. You rightly mentioned that at the very beginning about air pollution. I think how we're going to do this is really to use emotive language that really resonates with people and makes it a personal issue. And then that will allow them to kind of connect to what their own responsibilities are in the city and as a citizen, and why these changes need to happen with, we spoke about the ULEZ zone previously. If you make it emotive, you talk about it's not a ULEZ zone, but it's actually a healthy air zone or even a safe air zone.
So we should relabel it.
We need to really change the language we're using. And I think that we need to have a complete paradigm shift. We consume so much energy. I think the average European consumes 50 times more energy than they need to survive. And instead of all of the conversations today have been about how do we meet energy demand with cleaner energy, it's actually, how do we stop and reflect? What are the real meaningful human experiences and how much energy do they really require? And then how do we kind of shift our goals and aims to kind of really value the true cost of energy, not just the cost of production of energy? And then how do we use that to determine and budget what we're then building and deciding to do with it?
What's your view about how we can improve lifestyle in a city? I say that with a degree of skepticism, but also watching what's happening in Neom in Saudi Arabia, a city of 9.5 million being built from scratch. Now, there are many reasons to say this is not a practical thing to do. But do you believe that one can create something like an ideal city? Because there are those who talk now about a 15-minute city. Mm-hmm. In other words, you can do everything you need to do within 15 minutes of where you live.
Completely. I think, just to quote George Monbiot, he says that we should be striving for private sufficiency and communal luxuries. So actually, we're never going to achieve everybody having, I don't know, for example, the swimming pool and all of those gadgets and gears and cars. I think we need to really shift away from this idea that everyone has private ownership of different things and how can we collectivize things. And then I think we'll start to have a really exciting city model where you have kind of less individually, but more collectively, and you have more food production collectively. And it goes down into even kind of working hours and efficiencies. We talk about efficiency, but actually we just produce more and we consume more. And actually, if we could cut down work and start to be more productive with our time in terms of food growing or in terms of collectivizing and being with people and finding those things that really make us, function well as people and have greater resilience, because then you create network resilience between people. I think that's very possible.
Okay. Does anyone want to come in quickly? There's a hand right. There's a lady there in the middle. You have a microphone, even better.
I already got it. Yeah. First, thank you so much. This is really, really interesting. I have to backtrack a little bit to
Just
you.
put the microphone up a little.
Here, better? Better? Okay. To Lykke's previous point, I'm Isabel. I'm with Enright currently. But in my old job, I work towards cities with their climate action plans. Needless to say, it's a lot of nice goals, but not tangible enough plans in a lot of cases with cities. But Copenhagen is doing an incredible job. But with this kind of buffet of different paths you can take to decarbonize, can you elaborate a little bit how you prioritize within that? Because we've touched upon pollution. A lot of, decarbonizing the roads basically has down the line positive effects on health, etc. How do you make those priorities within your city to kind of know where to go first?
All right, we're going to have to wind up quickly, but just use that as a catalyst. But how do you handle the Rubik's Cube, essentially, of getting one thing fixed, but still having many other faces you simply can't get together? Lykke.
Well, you need to work with all parts of the Rubik's Cube. You cannot just pick one and say this is it. But I think the idea is for each of the ones, you have to look, how can we actually achieve the goal? Is it by stick or is it by carrot? To using bicycles as an example again, I mean, it's creating the opportunity for people to choose the bike by creating a bicycle lane, structure in Copenhagen has made it possible. And now about 50% of the population bicycle to work and school every day. So, I mean, that is a way of doing things. Then there are things that are really much more difficult because but it is actually, I mean, we once did with the politicians a carbon puzzle where they sort of had these puzzles and had to move them around, also to make them take part of the prioritization and realizing, okay, what will this actually, what implications will this have for themselves and for the citizens if they choose to focus on this?
And is there a danger of being elitist in all of this? We're sitting in one of the leading countries in the world, one of the leading cities in the world. When you look at Dhaka, Nairobi, Mumbai, places like that, where cities are really struggling to create anything. And of course, in Hanoi, there are more mopeds than there are bicycles, probably.
Yes, there is a big danger. I have been working with also an organization called C40.
Yeah.
And they are, I mean,
Sadi Khan is the chair of it.
I know. I know about the 15-minute city and all of that, and the air quality and low emission zones. But I also been working last week with Lagos from Nigeria, and 20 million people.
It's a disaster zone.
I mean, it's humbling, sort of looking at it and coming with on my high horse ideals from Copenhagen, and really have sort of to come down and say, okay, here I have to have a much different, much more pragmatic approach to things.
You probably got in quicker from the airport on your high horse than you can in a car.
Yeah.
In Lagos. And Lisa, again, we were almost out of time. So how do you resolve this? You can get one part of it in place, but the rest of it creates a legacy of other problems.
I think it's getting the right systems in place. And I think what we started talking about making kind of community networks, locally responsive solutions, and letting them give the space and the choice to grow up. I think if you try and take a top-down approach, and for example, you switch all of your funding into electric vehicles instead of collectivizing public transport, there's always going to be things.
But many people in cities can't even afford a bicycle, let alone an EV.
Which is why I think that this is exactly my point. I think it's really dangerous that we spend so much of our time talking about electric private vehicles when actually, when 1.6 euros are spent on roads for every €1 that's spent on railways. And actually what we should be doing is inversing that to make transport cheaper, that's public and collectivized, and allows you to kind of then space that. London's such a sprawling city, and it's the same for any of these cities that we're talking about. If you allow more an equitable kind of, you don't have this polycentric thing about the center of the city, but you actually allow communities to grow that are resilient, that can use the resources that are locally available to them to form, the basic needs that we need. We all are humans wherever we talk about these different cities in the world, but we have different resources available to us. And we need to just give the opportunity for them to grow out those kind of processes.
David, last word. Do you lead as a construction firm, or do you wait to be told?
Cool. I was all planned for a Rubik's Cube.
Well, you can add that as well.
No, you have to lead, and you can't lead and be told. Neither work. You have to do both in consultation, and the Rubik's Cube, particularly within a city, you have to understand your priorities. The worst thing for the delivery of a project is to start changing it halfway through, to start twisting the cube around and doing different things with it in the same thing. For every part of the delivery of a major project like that, you have to bring the information that can help manage that Rubik's Cube. But I mean, the thing I was thinking about, as my son shows me, people can solve Rubik's Cubes in 3 seconds. So
Is he employed in your office?
No, but he's like, look at this. So I'd like to end that it can be achieved, and we can balance these priorities.
Well, David, Annalisa, and Lykke, thank you very much indeed for 25 minutes on how to create some kind of sustainable cities, or cities which can be sustained. Thank you all very much indeed. Let me hand to Hannah.